Okay, what's up everybody? This is Ryan and you're watching episode 28, I think, of my live stream Q&A. So a couple changes from previous episodes you've possibly seen. So for starters, I have a proper microphone, finally. For many years I used lapel mics, and the reason why I used the lapel microphone is that they tended to be better in terms of like background noise, but the quality of my most recent lapel microphone was it was fine, but it wasn't great. So anyways, here we are. We have a proper condenser microphone, I think it's called, or cardioid microphone or something like that. So yeah, hopefully my voice doesn't sound terrible. If in terms of quality, I don't care if it sounds terrible in terms of what it actually sounds like. But if there are any like audio troubles or stuff like that, please let me know, because I'm working with a new setup. Also, at least for the time being, I've gotten rid of the cheesy green screen background. That may make a comeback, but not yet anyways. And also, as you can probably see, I still don't have a second monitor. So we'll just have to deal with you probably having to see my OBS Studio window and kind of seeing how I do things. So that's basically it. What's up, everybody? Thank you for joining me. Welcome, Hardik, Harish, Isam, and Carlos. All right. Also, I like frantically try to think of something I could throw behind me to kind of make it like a interesting background. So I grabbed a kettlebell and a keychain that my girlfriend gave me. Anyways, what's up, Adam? So yeah, I'm going to shut up now and, well, I won't shut up now, but I'll stop rambling profusely. So it's been an interesting weekend. Last week I did a podcast with Florian from Coding in Flow, mein Freund. So I'm not going to spoil anything from that, but hopefully we'll be able to see that sometime next week. Of course, editing is something that takes a long time. Anyone who's done much video editing would know that. But hopefully, yeah, we'll see it soon. And we ended up recording 3 whole hours, which was interesting. Obviously, we had a lot to talk about. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but I was trying really hard to be concise. But we just ended up talking about a lot of different subjects. And one of them is something that's it's useful for programmers, but it's not something that the average programmer is especially interested in listening to. But that happens towards the end of the podcast. Anyways, I won't ramble about that too much, but watch out for that podcast, because we talk about a lot of the things that I talk about on the stream, a lot of the questions I get asked about, and hopefully it's got some decent content. So anyways, my plan for today is basically to obviously answer questions, and then if we don't get any specific questions in, then I wanted to do some rambling about my programming language that I'm working on, and some sort of concerns regarding that, and sort of different paths I potentially have to take. What's up, Jan2? So that's what we're going to start with, and I'll just kind of give you a quick rundown of where we're at here. Let me get out of full screen mode. That would probably help. Let's see. So a quick question I can answer right away. Carlos asks, do you think it's worth it to migrate my shared preferences and my Play Store projects to Data Store? Any good benefits to do the migration? Personally, I really liked Data Store. So I think it's got a really nice, clean API to use. I think if I recall correctly, it's been a while, but if I recall correctly, one of the benefits is that it has error handling, which shared preferences doesn't. So if for no other reason, I just found it to be a simpler, cleaner API. And then I was also able to sort of pull it out of the front end of the application to make it so that the front end wasn't really super aware of where this temporary data was being stored. But I really liked it. I do show you how to implement Proto Data Store, which is different from Preferences Data Store, but they're in the same sort of library umbrella. So I do show you how to do that in my most recent Android course, I think in the persistence package when we're working on that. So if you want a tutorial on that, I've got that set up. But yeah, I do recommend it. I liked it. And I don't always say that about new Jetpack libraries, but I did like that one a lot. If you know what you're doing, it's really easy to sort of set it up asynchronously with coroutines or executors or something like that. So a couple months ago, I decided to basically build a programming language. You're very welcome, Carlos. The reason why I decided to do that is because I felt like that was an area of software development that I was very ignorant of. I knew a little bit about the JVM, and I knew that the JVM had its own bytecode, and I knew a little bit about assembly, but I've never really written much assembly. I did build a computer in Minecraft, an actual little 4 to 8-bit computer, mostly 4-bit computer, and that helped me understand digital circuits. So basically, compiler development was something I was still very ignorant of, and I was curious, like, what exactly goes on in Java C or Kotlin C? Because if you've ever seen Java C, that stands for Java Compiler. It's part of the Java SDK. So I was always curious about what actually happens, and generally what occurs when you dive into some obscure sort of field of programming. You end up sort of seeing a few things that really blow your mind, but for the most part, it's very straightforward code. Unless you're looking at something which is built using a ton of libraries. So I made it as far as creating a tokenizer, also known as a lexer, also known as a, what's the other word for it? Scanner. And then I've created a parser. And so those are kind of like the first two stages, almost three, because the parser generates what's called an AST, or abstract syntax tree, which is basically a data structure. I'm not going to ramble too much about this stuff. But basically, what I've sort of built what's generally known as a compiler front end. And then the next stage I'm trying to figure out is what I'm actually going to be compiling to, or possibly interpreting to. Originally, I was going to basically make it for WebAssembly, or WASM. I'm not sure if many people have heard of this, but it's a really interesting project. Now, the thing about it is that I might end up actually compiling, or I guess possibly interpreting. It's kind of hard to discern which is going on, to JVM bytecode, at least for the initial thing, because WASM wasn't quite as far along as I thought it would be, and it wasn't quite as interoperable. Also, the code that I wrote, and I'll just show it to you really quickly. The code that I wrote is in Kotlin. And the reason why I wanted to do this in Kotlin is I knew what little I knew about compiler code is that it's very tedious. You're basically building these giant state machines that look at source code and tokens and stuff like that. I knew it was going to be very tedious code to write. Why is it broken? That's fun. Oh, I must have accidentally hit N. So anyways, yeah, just in a nutshell, I'll just introduce this idea really quickly, and then we can move on to other questions. So the first thing I did is I actually set up an interface, because I might use a different kind of scanner. I might use a library to generate a scanner. But we have this iScanner thing, and the important thing you need to know is that what a scanner does, it takes in source code as a string typically, and then it returns a list of tokens, and the tokens represent every individual element of the language. So we've got like left parenthesis, I finally figured out how to say that properly, right parenthesis, braces, commas, logical operators, literals, all these kinds of things. So it returns a list of these tokens. Oh, sorry, wrong one. It returns a list of tokens. Then we feed that list of tokens into what's known as a parser. So you can see here we give it that list of tokens. And the parser spits out a list of statements, which kind of represent what's called an abstract syntax tree. That's very technical. Don't expect to understand much of what I just said here. But the point is, what I tried to do in my journey of learning compiler development is to just figure out, what exactly do these things do? And for the scanner, it takes in source code, it spits out a list of tokens or a list of exceptions. For a parser, it takes in our list of tokens, and then it spits out a list of statements, And then the next stage is having something that sort of creates executable code from that list of statements. So anyways, we have a couple questions, so I'll jump in. Let's see. Hardik says, hey, I created a simple currency converter app, but I used a proper architecture and clean code practices. Can you review it? Potentially. Let's see. I'm not sure if I can review it live right away. And unfortunately, I'm really quite busy these days, but I can possibly have a look at it. I guess if we don't get any much more questions, then I'll have to do that. Gentoo asks, have you lately built an APK? I found the APK size has doubled for the same project after updating Android Studio. I was building an APK for some app store other than Google Play. I'm not really sure. Maybe that has something to do with the fact that they've kind of moved over to using, what do they call them, app bundles. I haven't really been monitoring the size of my APKs recently, so yeah. So it looks like we are having calls to do the code review. So let me just do full screen blockage mode here so that you don't see my illicit website history. Is he joking? I am joking. I use, what do you call it? Incognito mode. Okay, this will just take me a moment to find this thing. I have to find your GitHub, Hardik. Okay, I think that's it. And yep, that's you. And what is the project called? So before I even do this, you've got to understand, this is me jumping into a project, not really knowing your skill level, not knowing what your goals were, all these sorts of things. So, you know, just understand this is a blind look at a repository I've never seen before. But with that being said, I'm going to do my best to give some useful feedback if I think it needs to be met. Oh, wow. That's a low blow, Cybershark. Flutter news. Get serious. I've never written a single line of Flutter. Dart, I should say. Okay. So now we're going to do code review. Привет, мой друг. Как дела? Okay, so this is Hardik's repository currency converter. So the first thing I want to feedback or comment on is I do appreciate that you have a README. It's even got some nice fancy characters. So, and we're just going to go ahead and hit that star button. First star for you, Hardik. So the idea is a currency converter, which is pretty straightforward. We've got a sort of a clean architecture user interface. So one thing I suggest for beginners, if they're wondering like, how do I do user interfaces? A great way to do user interfaces, especially in the start, is to basically just copy material design. And the reason why I suggest that is that material design, which is this kind of simple paper-based design here, I'm not sure if that's what you're going for specifically, Hardik, but that's kind of what I see. Material design is easy to implement and it's not flashy, and it can be really quite difficult to get super flashy with the user interface. So I'm not insulting your user interface. It looks decent. It's, yeah, it's clean, basic, and fine. So let's, the thing that I'd be curious to know is what architecture you are actually going for. So one of the things, I hope I'm not, oh good, you can actually hopefully see this. One of the things that I do agree with Uncle Bob on, and there's things I don't agree with Uncle Bob, Robert Martin, but one of the things I do agree is that the package architecture should pretty much tell me right away what the architecture of the application is. So we're going to hop into app, source, main. Actually, first I'm going to see if you have any tests. Nope, doesn't look like it. We got the example unit test. Okay. It's not the biggest deal, but Always good to see some tests. Maybe you have some Android tests. Nope. Okay. That's okay. It's not necessarily a bad thing. The next thing I want to know is, are you using layouts? I can't remember. I already forgot. Okay, this is composed, so you're not using any layouts. That's good. Okay, so we have application, common, domain, infrastructure, and presentation. So I'm seeing a fairly typical kind of clean architecture setup here. So we've got the domain layer. Now there's almost as many ways to do clean architecture as there is programmers doing clean architecture. What I typically think of as a domain package is the barest sort of classes and interfaces and enums and constants and things like that that sort of represent the problem domain. So let me do a little bit of teaching here. This term domain derives from the term problem domain, and there's different there's technical definitions for what the problem domains. It's kind of thought of as like the area of expertise which the application must represent. Now, when we say area of expertise, that can be a little bit misleading. But for example, a calculator, what is the problem domain of a calculator? Mathematics in general. What is the problem domain of a currency calculator? So that would be obviously currency exchange. So I typically like to see things, so I probably want to see something like currency, just a data class or something like that. Now, with that being said, that's my approach and understanding of clean architecture, and there's many different ways to do it. So let's jump in there. So we see repository and entity, which is very typical sort of Uncle Bob style. Let's look at repository. So we just see an interface. So this is personally how I like to do a domain layer. I don't like to have interactors unless I really need them. Generally speaking, I don't need them. I do like to have my sort of repository interfaces, my facades in the domain layer. And the reason why is they're a very abstract representation, of the problem domain. So just another little bit of teaching here. So in my approach, so everything I'm about to say is in my approach, because you've got to understand there's just so many different ways to do clean architecture. The data classes and enum/sealed classes in domain represent the information of the problem domain, and then the the repositories represent the functions/verbs/operations, the things that need to happen. Okay, now I'm suddenly in one of my projects. Let's just jump back here. So I actually guessed it, we do see a class called currency, and we've got a repository, so I like what I see so far. Let's jump into entity. Generally, this will be, like I said, just data classes. Yep, data class currency, conversion factor. So I give you extra points, Hardik, for not overcomplicating the domain or doing. I mean, there's a pretty big pushback against clean architecture these days if you follow people like Gabor Varadi, Zwinden. So I appreciate, and I do agree with a lot of what Gabor is saying. I think sometimes he kind of, the terms like pigeonholes the idea of clean architecture, but certainly what he complains about specifically, I agree with. Presentation, so that'll be like the Android specific stuff to draw the user interface. This is presumably a feature, homepage, DI, selector page. We've got our composables. Decent amount of separation of concerns. So far, I like what I see, Hardik. I'm not going to spend all day doing this. But yeah, so far I like what I see. Yep, good. I want to see how you do DI, which stands for Dependency Injection. So you got your view model. Interesting. Now I'm curious, are you using, where are your view models? Common? Nope. Infrastructure? Nope. I want to look at your view models. Maybe I just skipped over them. Concurrency converter view model implementation. Okay, so you're not using Android view models, which I like. I personally don't find it very useful. Okay. And what approach of Mvvm are you using? Do you ship a whole model to the view or specific? Okay, you're using channels. That's cool. How do the composables subscribe here? Okay, using mutable state flow. Okay. And for every UI element. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, I generally, so far, Hardik, I really like what I see. I think you've got a good balance of not over-engineering things, but doing things properly in like a clean architecture style. I personally am quite fond of the approach of having some kind of observable thing. I don't really care if you use Flow or you use a Kotlin function type or you use RxJava, or I don't typically suggest live data, but you can take that route if you're big on Jetpack libraries. But I like what I see here generally. Nothing is jumping out at me as being super difficult to read, difficult to understand. You've got a good package structure, dispatcher provider, result wrapper. I see a lot of things that I like, so I don't actually have any negative feedback for you. There's probably some obvious things that you're aware of, like the user interface could use a bit of spicing up, a little bit of changes, but that's okay. That's not necessarily the goal with this particular project. And at this point, I'm basically nitpicking. Also, I like that you've built it with Ktor. That's super cool. So yeah, I don't actually have any negative feedback for you, Hardik. Very, very well done. All right, do we have any other questions? It's nice when I do a code review and it's not like terrible code, because on occasion that'll happen and it'll be like, I don't want to be mean. So we had a question from DK or Decode Test. How can I save my SQL Cipher database key in my code safely? Is there any way? Please tell me it takes a month. I'm stuck on that. Unfortunately, Decode, I haven't dealt with that particular problem myself. So maybe someone in the chat has figured that out. Cybershark has suggested libsodium, so much appreciated, Cybershark, our resident graph data structure expert here. So yeah. So do we have any other questions? For any beginners that are watching here, I'm happy to answer simpler questions too. If you want an introduction to some area of computer science or something of that nature, I can ramble about that too. But I see we have a fair number of viewers, so let's get some questions going. All right. Very well done, Hardik. Well, if we don't get any questions, I'll start rambling about my compiler again. By the way, interesting little tidbit about this compiler just for a moment here. You'll see like there's this parser class, which is gigantic. You're very welcome, Hardik, and I'll get to your question in a second, Pujan. You'll see this is like a pretty big class. And then same thing with the scanner, pretty big class. Like the scanner is 400-ish lines. The parser is, wow, over 1,000 lines. Every one of these units you see in both of these things was actually built using test-driven development. So we have our scanner tests, for example. So every time I wanted my scanner to learn something new, to manage some new kind of token, I wrote a test before that. I ran the test to make sure it was well formed. And then I tried to implement the particular thing that I was trying to implement. And then I did that until the test was passing, and I built the thing incrementally. And one thing I've learned in both data structures and algorithms and also in compiler development, when you're not messing around with a whole bunch of libraries, like this is all pure Kotlin code, there's just no excuse, in my opinion, every reason to apply test-driven development principles. I think that's very useful and important. But it can be really tricky to follow test-driven development in the context of a GUI application because you have tight coupling to the platform, and that makes things difficult to test. So, yeah. So let's go with Pujan. Pujan asks, any course recommendation to start Kotlin? I'm not sure if you mean pure Kotlin or what you mean. So for Kotlin Android, consider checking out the playlists on my channel. I have several free courses available on my channel for various different skill levels, like an absolute beginner's introduction to Kotlin and Android, various things like that. I don't typically recommend too many different courses outside of my own. One that I'm comfortable recommending is check out Don Felker's Kotlin course. This is, I believe, pure Kotlin. I really respect Don Felker. He's someone I've been learning from since 2016, and I know he makes really good quality stuff. So consider checking his thing out. It's also on YouTube. If you, for like an advanced, largely Jetpack library type approach, you can check out Florian, so Coding in Flow. Check out his, what's it called? Paging, caching tutorial / course. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but if you're going to build a Jetpack style application, what I mean by that is using lots of Jetpack libraries. I think his tutorial is a very great idea. He had a lot of help from Gabor Varadi, who is one of the top Android developers on the planet, in my opinion, and in many people's opinions. So those would be kind of my recommendations. Check out the playlists on my channel. I've got a lot of playlists, and there's a lot of varying skill levels for that. So, yeah. Adam has a question here, which is a good question. How do you write his name? That Android guy? So that's, oh, sorry people. Thank you for Aditya. I only have one monitor at the moment, so I don't actually know which mode I'm in. Yes, thanks guys, I got it. So these were the things that I was typing. So check out my playlists. Check out Don Felker, his YouTube channel. He's got a great 9-hour Kotlin course. Florian's got a great one. The guy I was talking about is Zwinden, also known as Gabor. His name is Gabor Varadi. I hope I'm spelling that. I feel like he has an H in his name, but Gabor. You might know him as Epic Panda Force on Stack Overflow or Zwinden. So, yeah. Anyways, I'll leave that up there for a moment so people can write that stuff down. All right. Let's see here. Decode, I don't personally know about libsodium, so I can't help you there, but maybe someone else can. Okay, what was that question we saw? Open source project. All right. So, Adam asks, open source project to get more advanced in Android. Any recommendations? So the ones that really affected me or helped me a lot were so Android. These are these ones are GitHub repos. So there's Android architecture blueprints was a great set of repos. I think it's the name of the repo is like that, but if you just type GitHub Android architecture blueprints, you'll find it. There's Android architecture components. So this is really good if you're into like Jetpack libraries, because they demo most of them there. This is just a good way to sort of learn architectural approaches. With some of the projects they have there don't use very many third-party libraries. Some of them do. You've got, and then if you're interested in Compose, people are really crapping on these, and I think a lot of that, I think people didn't really understand what was going on here. So we've got Android Compose samples to learn Jetpack Compose. A whole bunch of people were crapping on these repositories and being like, these aren't applications that are scalable and stuff like that. And it's like, they're literally just demoing how to build a UI or how to use a particular library for UI. And as someone who's actually built projects specifically to teach specific APIs, it's like, I'm not necessarily going to build a gigantic, flexible, enterprise level social media application just to show you how to use a UI library. So that's some lists. And then check out my GitHub. Bracket Cove is my GitHub name. And I have like 50 projects on there. And if you want to learn like the basics of Android architecture without getting stupidly complicated, there's a Android Clean GUI, I think it's called. For Compose, you can look at Graph Sudoku. I build this application on my channel and also on the free Codecamp channel, and also Samsara KMM. I'm not actually sure. This is the project I have open right now, Samsara KMM. So this one is a multi-feature application which uses Compose. It's like a day tracker application. Those would be the main things that I personally recommend. So I think that's pretty much it. Abdullahi, I do actually use the taskbar quite a lot, so that's why I don't hide it. So yeah, those would be the main ones that I suggest. I'm trying to think. Yeah, that's pretty much it off the top of my head. Okay, any more questions, people? Can you cover Proguard configuration tutorial? I think I covered that. An important thing is, so Android now uses R8 unless they've changed it instead of Proguard. Now, I think R8 is still capable of using Proguard rules. I have a tutorial which is like a guide to publishing Android applications. And if I recall correctly, I cover R8 and Proguard in that particular tutorial. So you'll want to check that out. You're welcome, Adam. I can just sit here. I got time. Oh, that's an interesting question. Sure, I can riff on that. Aditya says, I don't know about RxJava, but trying to learn Kotlin flows. Any tips for this? Because I feel like it's a little bit difficult. I can definitely give you some things that helped me. So I think what you're missing is a way to think about it. Because I found for me, RxJava was really difficult, and by extension, Kotlin flows, until I had to wait a way to actually visualize and understand what was going on. And what might help you, and this is what helped me, is to understand what's kind of going on under the hood of these things. And the way to do that is to learn about the observer pattern. So let me pull up some code for just a moment. Okay, where is it? Okay, so we have this project here on my GitHub account, Bracket Cove, Android Clean GUI architecture. I'm going to switch to the Kotlin branch because the original one is in Java. And I think... So my friend Chetan actually created the Kotlin branch here. Chetan Gupta, who's another very good, great developer. He makes content as well. I should give him a shout out here. Chetan2 is his handle on Twitter. So the important thing to understand with RxJava and a lot of these things is that the important thing to understand is the basic observer pattern. And if you can understand that, then this kind of weird way of classes communicating can start to make sense. And the way that I'm going to show that to you is to look at some code specifically. Now, this is his project, so just give me a moment to actually find the observer pattern implementation. Here we go. Also, I should mention the observer pattern is also known as the publisher subscriber pattern, along with several other names. Okay, so the important thing to understand is in the observer pattern in the simplest form, you've kind of got two kinds of things. Obviously, you can build on that, but we're talking about the simplest case here. You've got a publisher. Let me zoom in a little bit. Or an observable. Same thing, just a different word. And what this publisher does is it holds a list of subscribers or observers. And that this is literally just a list. So don't overthink. Just understand the reason why I'm showing this to you is the code is actually really simple, even though RxJava is not simple and Flow isn't simple. But the thing that it's built around is quite simple. We have this publisher thing, and it just has a list of subscribers. And they might have some kind of event. Usually it's like a generic. So they might publish an integer. They might publish some kind of data class, whatever. And what happens is that when the publisher is told to, it'll have this notify event. So it'll basically tell all of the listeners, all the subscribers, all the observers, it'll send them data. Okay? The subscribers will all implement a single interface called subscriber, which has this onUpdate function. So whenever we tell the publisher to do so, it will send the data through this pipeline, through here, into here, and then the subscriber figures out what to do with it. So this is, and obviously we can, subscribe is how you attach a specific subscriber to a publisher, and then we can clear all the subscriptions when we want to. So in a nutshell, this is basically the most important thing to understand when it comes to any of these different libraries that use the observer pattern or something similar, some loosely coupled way of communicating. Generally speaking, they're always going to be doing something like this. Now, I haven't messed around with Kotlin Flow much. I've used RxJava quite a bit, but almost definitely you're going to have the same kind of setup here. And hopefully this is like some kind of model that you can use to understand. So let's look at the rest of the code to see what kind of goes on here. So we've got a view model, and this view model implements publisher, and it publishes main events. Let's see if we can find that main events thing. Is that here? Base? Nope. Contract? Yes. So in this case, we have these sealed classes which represent different possible events that can occur both as like update events that we can send to the view, and then events that the view can send to the view model, for example, or the presenter. So they're just sealed classes, basically. And so what happens is our view model, if it'll load, implements publisher. It has a field or an observable thingy for every element of the user interface. And what happens is anytime an external class sets something on this view model, we will notify our subscribers by calling this notify method. And remember, notify was a method that is defined in the publisher. It's not defined here. Okay, cool. So once that occurs, the activity in this case, we kept it super simple. Normally I wouldn't use an activity as a view, but it's a simple application meant to demonstrate a basic pattern here. When the notify event is called, then we're listening somewhere. Let's see here. Yep, we have the single update method, the single notification channel that takes in the sealed class, and then it updates the user interface is basically what's happening here. So hopefully that might have been a simple example that would help you understand how RxJava or Flow or something like that kind of works. So the key is to understand the basics of the observer pattern and how loosely coupled communication occurs. Because when you don't understand that basic pattern, that under the hood you are actually calling the thing, it's under the hood, you're still having one class calling another. It's just that they're hiding it through primarily the usage of interfaces. So that's kind of the most important thing. What the biggest and most important conceptual leap I needed to go through to understand these sorts of libraries. So hopefully that was useful. All right. So, question from Angela. So Angela asks, can I code native Android? Let me make sure I'm in the right thing. Yes. Can I code native Android? Sorry, there's some background noise. I apologize about that. Can I code native Android in JavaScript? I know there are other frameworks like Ionic, React Native. Is there anything else? So we need to clear up some naming conventions here because we need to talk about this word native. So generally speaking, native on Android would refer to the languages which are understood by the OS itself. So that would include JVM bytecode. So in brackets here we have Kotlin and Java. And then there's also a C/C++, which would be because Android has a Linux kernel. In other words, Android is based on Linux. So when we're talking about native Android development, this is basically what we're talking about. Now, I haven't messed around too much with creating stuff in JavaScript, but if I understand it correctly, in order to run JavaScript on Android, you need to use a web view. Now, I might be wrong. This was the case years ago. I haven't played around with it, and maybe they have some special kind of interpreter thing going on. I don't know. But this is what we're talking about in Android. So the whole point of using something like React something like React or Flutter or those sorts of... Flutter isn't actually classified in the same way, but using like a JavaScript-based library would be to have something that you can share in, for example, a web front end, a web application alongside the Android application. Or if you just really want to build your Android UI in JavaScript for some particular reason. So generally speaking, so the only one I have experience with is React Native. And I mean, so can we code native Android in JavaScript? Not in my opinion. It kind of depends on what you really define native as. Generally speaking, you will get a trade-off with JavaScript-based libraries. So you will lose some fine-grained control over your over the device. So through the JVM and the Android platform APIs, which are exposed to the JVM code, and then through the Linux operating system that's running on Android, you're going to have access to device libraries. What's the word I'm looking for? Device APIs. So fine-grained control over the device. We're thinking like the camera, the telephony drivers is the word I'm looking for. You'll have access to device drivers and some lower level kind of control over it. And you're generally going to lose that, or you're going to have trouble working with it using something like JavaScript. The benefits are that you can use and reuse potentially your part of your code base across, for example, like web/Android, and I think iOS as well, although I'm really ignorant of the support of iOS for like React Native, but I'm pretty sure you can do that. So it's kind of a trade-off of getting some code reuse and being able to write your code, your UI in JavaScript, but you're going to lose fine-grained control over the device. I'm going to kind of assume, Angela, that you're probably like a web developer or a JavaScript developer, and you want to know, can I bring those skills over to Android native? It's very difficult to say. You're going to be able to build a lot of stuff fine using one of these libraries, but you're also going to run into some really awful situations that are going to be super difficult, and it's going to cause a lot of problems. If the front end of your Android application basically just parses and displays a REST API or something like that, and doesn't really need to interact with the device itself too much, you're probably going to get lots of mileage. But other than that, it gets really tricky. So that's basically my answer there. Harsh says, I learned about Mvvm, and when instructor was teaching me, I was able to do everything, but now I tried using same Mvvm on a different project. I'm finding it hard to implement it or use it. Maybe what might be useful for you, Harsh, is check out Mvvm on Android. Kinda awkward, to be honest. This is an article I wrote on Mvvm. And it's going to demonstrate two different approaches to Mvvm, which I would suggest. And then also, you might want to check out, most of my recent tutorials have view models in them. I'm not necessarily doing Mvvm specifically because I find boiling things down to only 3 layers is typically not very useful. Understand that 3-layer architectures like MVP, Mvvm, MVC, these are useful generalizations for the front end of a GUI architecture. Don't try and fit every application or feature into these 3 layers, because you will run into situations where that works either not at all or very poorly. I have a lot of content on Mvvm though. For example, my articles. So that might be something you want to look into. Carlos mentions, by the way, Ryan, if you're checking GitHub projects, you can add to the URL these two digits, 1S, and it will open a Visual Studio Code theme. It'll be easier to navigate through the project. Thank you, Carlos. That's a useful tip. Hardik asks, what do you think about creating a blog and possibly a YouTube channel as a beginner Android dev? As a beginner Android dev? It's a mixed bag. So let's talk about the pros and cons. Let me write the question too. That would be useful. So Hardik asks, what do you think about creating a blog as a beginner Android dev? Let's talk about pros and cons. So pros. Teaching is, in brackets, potentially a good way to learn and cement your knowledge. So by presenting the things that you learn as or to other people and attempting to make it intelligible, you'll basically learn it better and understand it better, generally speaking, unless you really half-ass it. You can build a following, which is useful for almost every aspect of being a developer. You can help people and make connections. So the greatest thing about my channel, like sometimes people will ask, Ryan, why do you still do this? Like some of your videos get 200 views. You have no idea what it's like to be having a bad day, and then someone comments on your video. You really helped me, man. Thank you so much. Like in the past little while, I've had, I think, like 10 different people come to me and say, your videos, your tutorials helped me get a job. So the kind of goodwill and good positive sort of feeling that you get from helping people is very underrated these days. Most people are all about the money and how much money do you make and how do I make the most amount of money with the least amount of effort and all that kind of nonsense. And it's a really nice thing. So that's pretty much the main things. Potentially, and what I'll talk about next after I talk about the cons is how I would suggest you approach it. Let's talk about cons. If you attach your self-esteem to your likes/views/popularity, that can become very unhealthy. This is something we see a lot in like social media influencers. Like there are people out there who basically their day job is taking photos of their butt and posting it on Instagram, and they get very popular if they have a really nice butt. And then they basically need those likes and views in order to feel good about themselves. And that can be a very unhealthy thing. I had a little bit of that early on in my career of being popular for posting photos of my butt. No, that was a joke. I had a little bit of seeing my self-esteem rise and fall based on how many likes I was getting and stuff like that. But luckily I was able to pretty quickly figure out that that's just a very unhealthy way and to just enjoy the process of making the content and helping people. Another con would be as a beginner, you will be in what's called what is it called? Unconscious incompetence, which is a fancy word for I don't know what I don't know. So there will be things that you don't know, obviously, as a beginner. So if you're going to go out there and teach people, you have to be very careful about how you do that. And I'll explain how to be careful how you do that. But that's an important one. And then another con would be people seriously underestimate how long it takes and how difficult it is to make good quality content, whether we're talking about blogs, but especially videos. So for the people watching this, I'd like you to guess, So I created a tutorial, which is available on my channel and also on Free Code Camp for Compose building. So it's a Compose tutorial in Kotlin, which also demonstrates graph data structures and algorithms for solving Sudoku problems. It's a 3.5 hour long video, if I recall correctly. So I'd like everyone to just take a guess. How long do you think it took me to create a 3.5 hour long video? Let's take some guesses. Alfred says probably takes you over 20 hours. Anyone else? I'll just give you guys a hint. That's like way too low. 20 hours is way too low. It's a fair guess because the thing is, you don't know it until you do it, and people seriously underestimate this. Hardik says a week. That's fair. 3 days? 3 days. That's a good one. Oh, man. Okay, I'll just answer. 200 hours. 2 months. 2 months for a 3.5 hour video. 2 months where I barely worked on anything else. 200 hours approximately. You don't know until you try. So, and this is something off camera, I was talking about coding and flow. Like, people don't understand the time investment it takes to create good quality content. Let me just give you a quick rundown of like my video making process or my course making process. So step number 1, create a topic outline. Step number 2, create a demo project. Step number 3, break the outline down into lessons. 4, for each lesson, create a lesson plan. 5, for each lesson, create a video plan. 6, and that includes a script. So the video plan includes a script. It includes pulling together code samples. It includes creating slides. It includes thinking about animation even at that level. It includes, so there's that. Then there's the recording process, which includes setting up a recording environment. And people don't understand how long recording takes. It's horrendous because unless you live in a very quiet space, you're going to have to do probably 4 times as many takes as you think you will need to do, merely because your cat is going to be scratching at your door, someone's going to sneeze, a plane's going to fly overhead, someone's going to be honking their horn, your neighbors are loud, there's wild animals out in the bush that are making noises. So just to understand that during recording, to record a 10-minute video, usually it's going to be something like an hour just to record it. So setting up a recording environment, doing the recording, and you have to consider, should I record video separate from audio? Generally, you'll get a better quality product if you do video separate from audio. However, your editing process is going to take usually twice as long. There's more stuff here, but let's just move on. Then 7, editing. So editing, again, if you've never done video editing and audio editing, you don't understand how long it's going to take you. To edit a 5-minute video, depending on the video, it can take you 5 hours to edit a little video, if it's a really good video. Editing is my least favorite part. So yeah, editing is just awful. 8, you've got publishing. 9, you've got uploading / social media. 10, you might do subtitles. Subtitles is a nightmare. In not my most recent course, but the one I did before that, I actually created proper subtitles, and it took me 2 weeks of 8 hours straight a day for 2 weeks to make the subtitles. It was just a nightmare. So when you combine all of these different things together, you end up with, like, creating an outline generally doesn't take long. Like, maybe I would say probably 4 hours, something like that. That part is like the easiest part. Creating the demo project, depending on the size of it, so 1 to 2 weeks, something like that, depending on the. And here we're talking about a big course. I'm not talking about a short little video. We're talking about a full course here. We've got breaking the lesson down into breaking the outline down into lessons. This generally takes maybe 1 or 2 days. That shouldn't take too long. If you're me, you order the lessons in a logical progression so that they build upon each other. This process generally takes 2 weeks. You might think that you can skip creating lesson plans and video plans, but the truth is that if you don't have proper lesson plans and video plans, your course is going to suck and you're going to spend way more time editing and recording because you're unorganized. So that takes about 2 weeks. Video plans, 2-ish weeks, 1 to 2 weeks maybe. Something like that. The recording process is a nightmare. That can generally will take 2 weeks, maybe, let's say 2 to 3 weeks, something like that. I'm not really keeping track here. Editing, again, 2 to 3 weeks, something like that. Publishing doesn't take super long, a few days. Uploading and social media, 2 days. Subtitles, potentially an extra 2 weeks. So all these things combined, I just wanted to, if you've never actually done this, you won't understand how much time it is. So I realize I went on a big rambling thing there, but what I wanted to share here is that you've got to understand, if you want to be a content creator and a good developer, you are going to have a difficult time managing your time, because there will be periods when you just want to make content, but you have to write code. And then if you spend all your time making content, you're not going to be a good programmer. So you have to find this balance of the two, and it's very difficult. When Florian and I from Coding and Flow were talking off camera after the podcast, that was one thing we talked about a lot, is the difficulty of balancing those two things. The last thing I want to say on this particular question is how to approach this. How does Ryan suggest you approach content creation as a beginner? Do it very humbly. So what I suggest is present it almost like a learning journal, and be prepared for feedback. If you put yourself on the internet, you're going to have a bunch of sneering nerds commenting and criticizing your stuff if you do anything wrong. Even if you don't do anything wrong, you'll have people who will present a different approach and then try and make it sound like it's better. You have to be very humble in your approach, because as a beginner, you have to just be very careful presenting your stuff as like, I'm an expert on this. You really want to try and present it as like, this is what I learned today. This is what I feel like I could improve, those sorts of things. And if you approach it from a humble attitude, then you'll do fine. But if you approach it like some people do, where they pretend to be experts and all they really do is they just copy paste the documentation and regurgitate it. And there's a lot of people out there that do that, and they don't really have my respect as programmers, because they suck at what they do. They just copy other people's stuff, and they spend all their time on social media trying to pass it off as their own. And those people, they might get some followers, but they're not someone I want to work with. They're not someone who's ever going to do something like what I do, which is off the top of my head, helping people and teaching things. So that was quite a rambling answer, but I hope there's some useful stuff you can sift through. Hardik, and yeah. Next question from Alfred. Oh, I like these kinds of questions. Alfred asks, I'm on my final stage of a job interview for a junior Android development position. Good on you. Even just for making it this far, good on you, Alfred. What is the major advice you give me before I submit the take-home assignment? Like, what should I add or etc.? This is a really tricky one. Think very carefully about what critical skills sorry, one sec. Not picking my nose, just scratching it. Think very careful about what critical skills the particular employer would like to see, and focus on those, especially if you don't have time for other things. So now I don't actually have this information in front of me, so it's difficult for me to say. But what I would say, let me just give you just a personal story, which was a big learning lesson for me. About 4-ish years ago, maybe 3, I think it was 4 years ago, I applied to an Android developer position, and the company, they didn't actually really build GUI Android applications. They had an SDK, which was kind of like an AdMob type thing. It was like an SDK for, it was an SDK for ad revenue. They didn't do it by serving ads. They did it by collecting Wi-Fi data from the user with consent, obviously. And that was kind of their business model. Now, I was really big into clean architecture and using like advanced Java stuff at the time. And for some reason, I just got it in my head that I really need to use that. And I was using RxJava and all the latest libraries, Dagger 2, RxJava, Room had come out. So I was like really up to speed on the current Android development scene and architecture and all that kind of stuff. And also I was writing Kotlin. I get the coding challenge from these people, and the coding challenge was basically this. The take-home assignment. Okay, so, and it was 2 hours long, which that's a real, I almost swore it, that's a real mean thing to do. But yeah, 2-hour challenge. And it was write in Java, which, so I've been writing Java code since 2013, but I was just out of practice, and my brain's never been great at memorizing syntax. And when going from writing Kotlin for a year to writing Java, it's like going from riding a sports bike to a sports motorcycle to a tricycle. Write it in Java. What were the two things? So download some data from a REST API, and then write a speed test for that data. And then the other thing, no third-party libraries. So that was the coding challenge they gave me. Write this app in Java. The app downloads some data from a REST API, write a speed test, and you're not allowed to use a single third-party library. So suffice it to say, I completely failed. That was the hardest I've ever failed on a coding challenge. So the point of that little story is that I should have really considered better in my preparation that this company, they were building they were building like an SDK for Android, the platform. And I had it in my head when I did this challenge, well, I'm not sure how well I'll be able to do these things, but if I at least do a good job with the UI and the architecture and the advanced Java stuff, that they will still think that I'm probably worth hiring. And I was dead wrong. They just wanted me to write the simplest, most basic Java code possible and have an ugly little user interface just to see if I could do these specific technical things. Now, I can go on about how I think that's just a stupid way to evaluate candidates to see if they are particularly good at these very easily learnable skills. But that was probably my worst experience with a coding challenge. So hopefully that gives you something to kind of think about. As far as like major advice, consider what they want to see if possible, and don't worry too much about being good at the things that they probably don't care about, if it's possible for you to sort of discern that. That's pretty much it. A lot of it depends on what the specific take-home assignment they've given you is. So that's, I think, just the most generally useful thing I could tell you. All right. You're welcome, Alfred. Good luck. And you know what? Even if you don't end up getting the job, good on you for applying and making it this far already. And yeah. Oh yeah, that was an awful one. Aditya asks, am I in full screen? How do we get data from REST API without using Retrofit Library? So yeah, you have to use HTTP URL. What is it? HTTP URL connection and Java's stdlib JSON stuff, which sucks. I did end up writing an application which this might actually be a useful lesson for people. Let me see if I can find this thing. I'm not sure if I'll be able to find it, but I'll try. Okay, here it is. So, so you have to use this thing called HTTP URL connection, which is part of the java.net, part of the standard library. And you basically need to set up your own sort of asynchronous thing. Here I am actually using coroutines, but this is basically how you would do that. In that context, I would actually probably use the Java executors API. If I was writing this in Java, I wouldn't use coroutines, obviously. So you could use the executors API. And this is basically what you have to do. You basically open a connection and then you see if you can parse the response and blah, blah, blah. It's annoying and clunky, but it's also useful to know. This project, if you're curious, is called Android REST Calculator, and I actually wrote it eventually as a response to the frustration I had over how poorly I performed in that coding challenge. And the useful lesson for people is if you fail really hard on a coding challenge, don't beat yourself up about it. Make it right. Fix what's bothering you. So if you fail really hard on a challenge, build the application, build the thing that they wanted you to build it properly, and that way you can be comfortable saying, you know what, you might not think I'm worth it, but here's what the hell I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure that I never run into that problem again, and I'm going to worry about improving my own knowledge. And yeah, that was kind of my attitude, and it served me well. I guess Adam asked, was it worth it? Yes. After the 2 months I've created 3 gigantic courses, and absolutely they're worth it by the end of it, but getting from like A to B is pretty torturous. And the problem with creating full courses is that it's almost impossible to be learning new code and APIs and things like that while you're doing your course. So unless your course is on the latest stuff, but if you're doing like a beginner course, then you're going to spend so much time with beginner material that it can be hard to sort of stay current. By the way, for those who are watching, if you've enjoyed the show so far, please do me a favor and consider hitting the like button and also the subscribe button. And then the little alarm bell icon, because YouTube will not tell you when my new stuff comes out, which is, pretty annoying. So consider doing that. Hardik asks, what are your views on Room versus SQLite versus Sql Delight? Lately, I really like Sql Delight for its cross-platform capabilities. I do like Room. My views on this is basically... Hey, what's up, Nikhil? Here's how I would kind of classify them. Room is easiest to create, but it takes some effort to avoid using live data, and I do not use live data in the back end of my application. You never will see that. Oh, my WordPad is not visible. Thanks, guys. Sorry. So the question was, what are your views on Room versus SQLite versus SQL Delight? Lately, I've been using Sql Delight, and I'll show you what that looks like. I only have one monitor. I got to buy my second monitor again. So yeah, Room is the easiest one out of all of these to work with. You don't have to really pretty much know any SQL proper in order to slap together a working Room database. The problem is really just that it's usually tightly coupled to other Jetpack libraries. It doesn't have to be, but yeah. If you only ever plan to do Android for the rest of your life, which isn't a very good idea because eventually Android will become obsolete, although I don't think it'll happen anytime soon. If you are just strictly an Android developer, Room is a great solution. Obviously, for SQL, you have to be fluent in SQL, probably use something like SQL Open Helper. It's been like seriously half a decade since I used that thing. Something like that, which is a very old API. It might even be deprecated. And then SQL Delight is a happy medium in my opinion. What's up, Neon Man? So I do have a project which uses SQL Delight. I think it's this one I have open, so I can actually give people a quick demo of it if... I was going to say if you want to see it. You know what? This is my show. I'm going to show it to you. Okay. This is a multi-platform project. Let me just find the stuff that I need to find here. Okay. Un momento, por favor. Can't even read my own packages here. Where is the implementation? I think it just generates it. Da-dum. Oh, it's here. Okay. Wait a minute. No, that's not it. Okay, sorry, I just needed a moment to pull together the various things. So just for anyone who's just joined us, we're talking about, I'm going to give a quick demo of Sql Delight, which is a cross-platform library. And it's an interesting approach. So for the approach of Room, which is not cross-platform unless I'm very misinformed, the purpose of Room is to basically mostly write Kotlin or Java code and to basically hide having to learn SQL. And then it generates an implementation of an SQL database which has its own observer pattern inside of it. So it's a quick, efficient way for someone who's not really familiar with SQL to kind of build an SQL database using annotations and stuff like that. So it's pretty good, but it's limited to Android, and sometimes it's good to dive into things that make you uncomfortable. I personally haven't written a pure SQL database myself, so that's not something, like I've worked with SQL and SQLite Open Helper way back in the day in like 2015, 2016, but it's been a while. Lately, I've been using Sql Delight for my project. So what does it look like? Sql Delight is an interesting kind of approach. It's a little bit different. So I'm in the wrong project here. One sec. So basically how this thing works is the first thing you will do is you will actually write pretty much SQL. So you are actually writing almost SQL here. There's a slight difference, which allows for type safety. But you create basically your tables. And it was a little bit tricky to figure out how to do this because I'm not fluent in SQL, but I figured it out over the course of a day or two. And then you'll write these query thingies. And so basically what you do is you spend a bit of time up front writing some SQL queries. And then what happens is the Sql Delight library will generate, if you set it up properly, basically like a type-safe API to read and write your SQL here. So what does that thing look like? Let me just make sure. Hopefully this is the right class. Yes. So the resulting thing, it generates like a column adapter and herp-de-derp. Let me just refamiliarize myself with this thing. Where does DB query come from? Okay. Basically, it generates some of the boilerplate code for you. It allows sort of like a type-safe API, and you can write, this is similar to what you would get with like Room, except we're not using any annotations, and everything is kind of generated at compile time. So it basically makes it generates sort of a type-safe API in Kotlin that you can use to read and write and do all your queries into the SQL. So basically it's it just handles some of the boilerplate code for you. The difficulty with it is you're going to need to learn some basics of SQLite, but it's not that difficult. But the good thing about it is that it's cross-platform compatible. Like here I am actually using it in a multi-platform project. So that's kind of it. It's, slightly more difficult learning curve as opposed to Room. Probably maybe the same or a little bit less boilerplate code that you have to write. And then you don't have to mess around with annotations and stuff like that. So yeah, that's basically it. And you can probably do it better or more efficiently than I've shown you here. I'm still kind of a novice with this library. So yeah, those are my thoughts on those things. Andrian asks, hi Ryan, I would like to ask, do you have Android training path with Kotlin? Yes. Go ahead and check out the playlist section on my channel. You're going to see courses like Absolute Beginner Introduction to Kotlin with Android. Even if you're not a even if you're learning Kotlin, you may want to check out Working Class Java because you'll learn things about building applications and the JVM, which are super important. Even though it's a Java course, the Java samples are very limited, and you'll learn everything I would have wanted to learn as a junior. And then I have several Let's Build an Android application courses. So I've got an older tutorial on like Mvvm Android using Jetpack libraries. I've got my latest tutorial is Kotlin Compose with Android. So yeah, check out the playlist is basically what I'm saying. Rahul asks, what are your views? Oh, sorry, that's not the right one. Not sure why my copy paste isn't working very well. What's your views on Mvvm versus MVI architecture? So there's a couple things here. For starters, one sec. So let's start with Mvvm. So 3-layer architectures should be understood as nothing more than useful generalizations of the kind of code you will get in a GUI architecture, or a GUI project, I should say. So one thing I always like to teach people right off the bat is you'll hear people argue Mvvm is better than MVP. What about MVC? Blah, blah, blah. And you know what? They're all wrong. The most important thing you need to understand about any specific approach to architecture is that the more generalized it is, the less applicable it will be to special situations. The more specialized it is, the less useful it'll be in general situations. It will work really well in some specific situations and really poor in some other situations. So what exactly do I mean by that? So basically this, and I actually go into detail on this in the podcast, which will be coming out eventually with Florian from Coding in Flow. So just to give a very quick overview though, let's say we do Mvvm, which exposes a single data model. So just like a note object or a user object, the benefit of that Mvvm style, because there's not one single way to do Mvvm, is reusability of the view model. So a view model like that can be shared across various different views. How about Mvvm, which exposes a observable field, so just something that can be observed for every widget in the view, every element of the user interface in a particular view. So benefit of that is that it once again simplifies the view, making it easier to write and test if you want to test it. Now the problem is that you lose reusability of this view model. So you lose that reusability because it is tightly coupled to the presentation details of a specific view. Where could this approach up here be annoying? Well, the problem is that the view can become overly complex. So you get these gigantic, ugly views. And sometimes I don't need to, let me rephrase that. Generally, I don't need to reuse a view model. So why am I telling you about this? I'm not really crapping on Mvvm specifically. I'm trying to share with you the generally important thing for people to understand here, which is that no architecture is best. Anyone who says a specific architecture is the best architecture, and I don't normally say things this bluntly because I'm not trying to pretend like I know everything, but anyone who says one specific style of architecture is best does not understand what they're talking about. So the project requirements dictate the best architecture. And I alluded to some of those project requirements here. Do you need reusability? Consider the reusable style of view model. Is the view super complex? Consider the one that simplifies the view. these things are orthogonal, that fancy word. They move in different directions. Reusability is contrary to solving a problem with a specific view. Returning to Mvvm versus MVI. So I haven't actually built an MVI application. I have my own multi-layer architecture, which combines ideas from MVP, Mvvm, and I agree in general. What little I know of the MVI architecture is you've got like your view, you've got an interactor thingy, or sorry, no, an intent thing, which goes and fetches data from the back end, and then it returns this kind of model thingy, which is like a model of the entire user interface, and then you wholesale update the entire user interface from there. That's my limited understanding of MVI. Now, my opinion on that would basically be that sometimes it would be too much abstraction. Sometimes it would be a useful level of abstraction. And then sometimes I would actually want to control the specific widgets in a user interface with a single function per widget or a single observable field per widget. And if I'm correct, and admittedly I'm not an expert in MVI, that would be a specific situation where MVI might not be optimal. So I'm not saying, really what I would say is Mvvm versus MVI. Mvvm is going to work well in some situations. MVI is going to work well in other situations. And don't look at them as, I understand probably where you're coming from. As a beginner, I just wanted someone to tell me what is the best architecture, and then I'll just use that for the rest of my career. That's just not how it works. It doesn't work that way. The project requirements will dictate the best architecture. Okay. This is a great question from Aditya. How to think like a programmer, because when I try to learn a new concept, I'm always trying to remember the syntax and not the concept, and this is a really important thing. One of the most important things I can share with you, and this actually sort of introduces the idea of why writing comments and applying test-driven development, depending on the situation, can be very useful. So here's how I approach this topic in general of like how to solve problems. So as you've pointed to in your question, and I have the same problem. I had trouble learning to read as a child. I couldn't learn to read by learning the alphabet and then putting the words together. I was unable to learn to read how to do that. I had to look at the entire word, like an image of the entire word, and memorize that. And now I have exceptionally good English skills at writing and reading, but I had to find my own kind of way to do that. So you're not alone in having difficulty remembering syntax. I was awful at learning my first programming language because it was really hard for me to remember like the syntax of a for loop and stuff like that. I'm pretty good now because I've written thousands of for loops and stuff like that, and that's just one particular example. But I'll still forget specific details like the ordering in a what do they call that? An advanced for loop in Java, for example. If I haven't written one in 6 months, I'll generally forget how to order the thing. So you've kind of pointed to one of the key things in this particular thing is it's important to separate implementation details from what would be the word I'd be looking for? Abstract problem solving details. And when I say abstract, so an abstraction, to give you my own personal definition that I invented of an abstraction is a less detailed representation of something. So it's a layer above, is one way to think about it, the implementation specific details. And when I say implementation details, I'm really talking about the code itself, the actual lines of code necessary to make the abstraction. So it's important to separate implementation details from abstract problem-solving details because they're separate things. Solving a problem domain and implementing it can be done separately. So how do we do that? Many years ago, I took an online course through edX called Systematic Program Design, and it introduced a systematic process for designing programs and functions and things like that, which I still largely use today. I have my own twists on it, but really it's like this. Number one, explain the concept or the function, let's say. Let's be quite specific here. Explain the function, so some specific part of a concept. Explain the function you are trying to implement in plain language, potentially as a series of steps. Hopefully I have some code where I can demonstrate that. Let's see, parser. I know I have something here. Statement tests. I guess I could use this as an example. Let me just pull up a proper sort of example. Just give me a moment here, folks. It's important to have a good example. How's the weather? It's unseasonably warm here, actually, here in Alberta. I expected it to be like snowing. Okay, Graph Sudoku, this is a good demonstration of what's going on here, or what I'm trying to explain. Yeah, it's very unseasonably warm. Where are the tests? Sorry, I'm epically failing at finding my friggin' test packages here. Oh, that's frustrating. All right, I'm just failing to find a proper example off the top of my head. So let me just explain the process. Okay, explain the function you're trying to implement in plain language. Step number 2, if necessary, explain it as a series of steps in plain language, like an instruction list. Let me make sure I'm in the right mode here. Yep. Consider writing a test with expected inputs and outputs. And then 4, finally write the implementation. So just to really simplify this, before you write anything, explain it in plain language, consider writing it as a series of steps, and then you write the implementation. And this is one thing that a lot of people kind of misunderstand about software development. They think taking the time to, and I'm not saying this is what you do, but just the general point here. They think taking the time to write a comment and even like a list of steps in order to implement something is a waste of time. And the reason why that's generally wrong is that what you're doing is you're separating solving the problem itself in plain language from the problem of implementing it, which is separate. A good way of explaining it is delaying decisions. So you're solving one particular thing and then leaving the implementation details for later, which is like a divide and conquer approach. So that's kind of how I like to think as a programmer, how to solve problems as a programmer. Represent the problem you're trying to solve in plain language, or draw a picture if that's something you like to do. I always have a whiteboard handy where I draw these sorts of things that I'm trying to implement. Let me give you a specific example. I was earlier trying to figure out how to write a scanner, or different algorithms for writing scanners. So a scanner is some part of a compiler, a program which takes in source code and spits out lower level source code. And in order to do this, you can approach this from like a mathematical way and whatever. I actually imagined myself as the scanner looking through the source code, and considering what steps I would follow in order to mechanically go through and solve this particular problem. For some of them, I wrote the, ahead of time, I wrote the, BNF. I kind of, in a sense, solved the problem ahead of time by writing things in this ugly thing called Bacchus-Naur form. Don't worry about the details, but this is basically what I'm saying. It's a little more detailed than writing it in plain language, but I'm using something which isn't code to design the code itself ahead of time, so that when I actually get to writing the code, I kind of know exactly what I need to write. So this is kind of my general approach that I suggest for people. Design your code at varying levels of detail and abstraction, and leaving the implementation details as something to worry about at the very end. And implementation details including things like syntax, for example. I feel like that was a pretty rambly and awful answer, but hopefully there was something useful in there. Hardik asks, can you make a tutorial on setting up a KMM project and a Gradle tutorial? I already have a Gradle tutorial. Admittedly, it's quite dated. And I probably will eventually do some stuff on KMM. But, yeah. By the way, I'm not wearing any pants. I'm just kidding. I'm wearing shorts. All right. Rahul asks, thank you for the explanation. Do you make videos on UI and unit testing? I have lots of videos on unit testing, so definitely search unit test or test-driven development on my channel, and you'll find lots of videos. Like a great example, I've been building this application live, this compiler live, and during me building this, I show you how I write these tests and my whole process for writing them. Great example here. This is my general process for testing. Set up the test arguments, figure out the expected result, test the unit, assert the results. As far as UI testing, I actually aggressively simplify my views so that I don't need to mess around with RoboElectric and Espresso. That's known as the, oops, I just accidentally opened Spotify. That's known as the passive view / humble object pattern. Basically, make your views so simple that they can be indirectly tested by testing the classes which coordinate them. Now, that's just one approach. Some people really love using RoboElectric and Espresso. I don't. So I will aggressively unit test the classes which coordinate my views, but I don't typically do UI testing in the sense of using like Espresso or RoboElectric. What's up, Piyush? Okay, people, I'm getting kind of tired, so I'll stick around for one or two more questions, and then I'm going to call it a day. Do we have any more questions? What's up, Chime? How to do this and that in Kotlin. Ryan, how to make Kotlin. What do you mean by that? Oh, that's actually kind of heavy. Oh. I don't really understand the question. Oh, other developers. How to do this and that in Kotlin. And Ryan, how to make Kotlin. Yeah. What Rizwan is talking about is the programming language that I'm creating is, I would say, let's use the word inspired by Kotlin. This is what my programming language looks like. Probably so I do have values and vars, and I do have very similar syntax. But I use the word instruction instead of function and stuff like that. Montasir asks, bro, will you release any courses? All of my courses are available for free on my YouTube channel. So check out the playlist section. Aditya asks, how many kilos is that kettlebell? Not very many. We live in Canada, so we use this annoying thing where half of our system is in metric and half of our system is in imperial, because our main trading partner is the US, even though we are supposed to be using the imperial system. I think it's like 15-ish kilos. It's 35 pounds. So it's, not super heavy for kettlebell swings and stuff like that, but for a shoulder press, it's a little bit of weight. Actually, I'm going to be ordering I don't know how many, I guess it's like 22 kilo kettlebell, because this thing is getting way too light for my leg work. Okay, I finished Android with Java and now thinking of doing everything in Kotlin. Will it be a wise decision if I go with Kotlin for problem solving as well? I simply put, Montasir, yeah, if you're really comfortable in your knowledge of Java, then definitely dive into Kotlin. I think that's a great idea if you plan to be an Android developer. And Kotlin has some interesting prospects going on for multi-platform. So I do think Kotlin has quite a future. Swamanath asks, memory leak. Swamanath, yes, I did actually spell that correctly somehow. Give an example of a memory leak and what is the solution? What's a good example of a memory leak? It's been a while since so one example would be like, let's say you have a fragment with a recycler view plus adapter and retain instance equals true. This would be an example. So what can happen is when you rotate, or when the activity gets recreated and then the fragment gets recreated, depending on how you set things up, you can have a situation where your old recycler view adapter doesn't actually die. So to explain, how can I explain what a memory leak is, simply put? So you have to consider that an application has memory space. To be a little more technical here, virtual memory space. And you can look at that memory space using tools like the debugger and a profiler. So your application has a memory space. You can think of it as like I think of it in a 3D kind of way. And so you've got these virtual objects floating around in memory space. Like you've got anytime you're creating a class in Java, then you'll have the object of that class floating around in a specific part of memory space. So the general idea here is that a memory leak occurs when an object is held onto and thus stays in memory space longer than it is supposed to. So yeah, this is basically what a memory leak is. Now, a general rule is that things which potentially have a very long life cycle, such as the view hierarchy or the or context in Android, the class context, are potentially subject to memory leaks. So what can happen is if you have, oh Jesus, I did it again. Thanks guys. And thank you, Gentoo. All right, let's start over from the top. Let's just ignore this is one easy situation where you can get a memory leak, but I don't have the code open and I'm not going to go looking for it right now. You have to consider that an application is virtual memory space. It's got its own memory space, and you can look at this memory space using the debugger. Let's do that right now, just for fun. Let's hop into our parser. Probably an Android example would be better, but I'm not going to try compiling and running an Android project while I'm streaming. It's just not going to happen. So let's just do a basic JVM project. Let's jump in here. I'm going to set a breakpoint. I'm going to run this run everything test. This will take a moment. Okay, so when we set a breakpoint and we start the debugger, you've got to understand that what we're looking at here is the virtual memory space of an application. And this is kind of, now it's just part of the virtual memory space, but this is like the object space. I forget the exact name of it. So you'll notice that we have objects. So we have an instance of our donk handwritten parser, which is just a class. And then this thing can potentially, in the context of like Android, have references to other things. So for example, in Android, I could like have val context equals get application context or some crap like that. So you've got to imagine that we've got this class sitting in memory space and it's holding reference to something like context is a classic example for memory leaks. Or it could be something like the view hierarchy. Now, what'll happen is say we rotate the phone or something occurs where the memory space gets sort of interrupted or changed. Depending on how we set our code up, we can have a situation where we're holding on to an old activity or some old recycler view adapter, which should have been garbage collected, and it's just sitting there filling up this memory space. So imagine just more of these different things just growing and basically filling up our memory space. So that's basically what a memory leak is. It's a situation when a class that should be let go of or garbage collected isn't for some particular reason. Usually the cause is that it's some class which holds a reference to context, which is a very long living object, generally speaking, depending on which context it is. And then issues with like the view hierarchy, something tightly coupled to the view hierarchy, like a fragment or tightly coupled to the view of a fragment or an activity, stuff like that. So how do we, and don't worry, I won't forget this time. How do we, what is the solution? The most important thing I suggest is, so use leak canary. Leak canary is mandatory usage for an application that I'm about to publish. The other thing is just understand that if you have references to or from the application to subclasses of context or the view hierarchy, then you can run into memory leaks. So a good example just popped into my head. Suppose you have a view model, so derp view model, which extends view model from Jetpack. Let's make it even worse. Android view model, which is basically just a plain old view model that holds reference to application. So let's say you have one of these things and you do it wrong. You decide that this thing holds on to like a view, which is what you're really not supposed to do, but val view some fragment. So you've done the cardinal sin, the one thing you may not do in model view model. And in general, when you're working with these Android view models, you may not hold a reference to the view. You've gone ahead and done that. So I want you to imagine the phone rotates, for example, or a phone call comes in. Some fragment gets destroyed or should be destroyed. However, this view model persists because it's stored using whatever save state handle or whatever that crap is. I don't even use it. Then a new fragment gets recreated. And now you have a situation where you've got two fragments in existence when there really should be one, and you have a memory leak. So that'd be like a specific example. So thou shalt not reference a view from a view model. The main advice I can give you, use Leak Canary. That's the best thing to do. It's a library which helps you. It's very easy to set up. I don't even think you need to like add any implementation anymore. You basically just add Leak Canary to your Gradle and then it's basically running, if I recall correctly. And this will use Leak Canary and test your application with it running. But make sure to remove Leak Canary for your production builds. Okay, people. I'm kind of tired. I think that's all I have to say for today. I just want to thank everyone for being patient with my memory leaks to do with leaving WordPad open. I'm going to see if I can pull together a new monitor by the end of this week, but it might be a little bit after that. We'll see. But I just want to thank everybody for coming and watching, and hopefully there was some useful information amongst all of the rambling. And yeah, that's basically it. Thank you so much for watching, people. For all the people asking, have I done a tutorial on this, or can I do a tutorial on that? Go look at my channel. Look at the playlists. I put them in playlists. I have like over 300 videos. I've been doing this since 2016. So I've probably covered what you're looking for in a video. Thank you so much for watching. Peace out.